Good evening, everyone. This past Thanksgiving, I was fortunate to be able to go home and spend time with my family, and towards the end of the night, like we tend to do, all of my cousins ended up in one room and all of the grown-ups, I guess I'm still in that other subgroup there, but all of the parents ended up in another. And there was about 20 of us cousins there, and that's not even half of them, but there's 20 of us cousins there who were just talking about different things going on. And one of my cousins turned to me and said, "So how's everything going at the parish?" And just that week, I had my first experience with a deliverance session, my first time doing that in ministry, and I began telling them, and it was quite an extensive situation. And I began telling them about it, and you could hear like a pin drop. Everyone just kind of like tuned in to what I was saying, and they were just so fascinated by that, even my less religious cousins. And there's something about that sort of evidences the supernatural world, the supernatural realities. There was a priest in seminary that we had who would say that things like exorcisms or things like deliverance sort of serve like a quasi-miracle, because it gives you a sort of experience of something that is supernatural, something that is beyond empirical science, something that goes beyond what we know to be true by the laws of biology or psychology or physics. And we can see that in the gospel today. That sort of hook into this interest is what St. Mark is applying and preaching about really in this time. The Gospel of St. Mark comes to us from Rome, from pagan Rome. St. Peter and Mark, John Mark, it was his full name, are in Rome trying to evangelize the people there. And when we think about the reality that this is chapter 1 of the Gospel of St. Mark, we've just heard about the preparation of the Lord's way, of John the Baptist preparing the way of the Lord. And then boom, yesterday and today, St. Mark just focuses on deliverance, on possessed individuals and the Lord in his specific ministry of exorcism. What does this tell us? It tells us that in pagan Rome, this was something that was afflicting the culture. It was something that was afflicting society. And the Gospel of St. Mark that is being produced, is being preached in this time, is trying to address that situation. It's saying that there are a lot of injustices, there's a lot of immorality going on in Rome, but first and foremost, there's also a spiritual component. This is a spiritual battle as well. And I was explaining a lot of this stuff to my cousins, just in light of a lot of things that our nation is going through. And because of that situation, I also came across this book on my shelf. It's a book that I've had on my shelf for about a year ago that Mr. Fraune, who teaches at CTK, gave me. And I had it on my shelf, and I just placed it on there just to kind of do away with it, because I myself did not really want to dwell in this kind of thing, because I always found it to be a little superstitious or a little exaggerating. But this book is excellent. It provides just a great framework of how these things happen, how the church responds to them, how it happens in one's moral life, and how to prevent these sort of situations. And even in the gospel today, you have a certain like instances of maladies. We see that St. Peter's mother is sick, but right before then, his mother-in-law is sick with a fever. And before then, the Lord performs an exorcism. Right after then, the Lord performs another exorcism. And so what the evangelist, St. Mark, is trying to allude to, what he's trying to get us to see, is that this fever that she has, that she's come down with, this affliction, is a sort of oppression. It's in the context of two exorcisms, because this is a particular way that the enemy can attack us. And so this book, Mr. Fraune, does a great job explaining how these things can be dealt with in a very holistic way. One of the things that Mr. Fraune has also developed in some of his talks that I know he's had on YouTube is the idea that some exorcists have also preached on, that a country, not just an individual, but a whole country, can experience something like oppression. And we see that certainly in the same symptoms that if someone, like as an individual, was experiencing a certain level of oppression, they would become isolated, there would be division among family members and so on. And we see those same symptoms magnified at a macro level in our country. And the way to treat those things, as Mr. Fraune does a good job in explaining here, is the first step is not necessarily just like diving into full-blown deliverance prayers. The very first step, if like an individual was suffering through a deliverance or through a need of deliverance, the very first step is a recognition of one's faults, sin, confession, conversion, those things. And while that happens at a national level, St. Thomas says that a society is as good as its citizens, and that in order for us to truly have that conversion, that first step of deliverance for society, we have to begin at the local level. We can't just, in a communistic way, say, as a group, we need to repent. No, as an individual, to say, what have I done? What have I committed? How can I begin to offer sacrifices for my country? How can I grow in conversion? And those things, while they are painstakingly long and difficult, that's precisely the way to bring about a deliverance in a person and also in a society. Sometimes in these situations, we get people who will say, Father, I don't want confession, I just want you to do these prayers. And we could do those prayers, but the situations that led to such a thing will continue on, right? And another thing to consider in all this is what Mr. Fraune also places a good framework in, that none of this happens in a vacuum. None of this happens in a vacuum. Rather, it happens under the providence of God, that God is allowing these things, in a certain sense, to increase the faith of an individual. And I think in this instance, if our country is suffering under oppression, which I would say that that's the case, that it is to increase the faith of the church. And in that, we respond with that faith with conversion, as St. Mark is so prone to tell us, to repent and to believe in the gospel.